Hello and welcome to the Committee Formation and Best Practices webinar. First, we hope that you and your families are staying safe and remaining committed to your success in your community, as we know we are. Today's presentation revolves around the benefits of having volunteer-based committees for your association and how to use those and the latest best practices to your advantage. My name is Jessica Land. I'm the Director of Marketing for the Texas region, and throughout this day, I will be monitoring and moderating this conversation. We'll also have my colleague Ginger Eastham on the back end providing technical support and the best possible online experience. Keep in mind that video conferencing is kind of a new foray for everyone, and so we appreciate your patience if we run into technical difficulties, but we will iron them out as quickly as possible and keep going forward. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists today who will provide some insight into what it takes to build a committee and how it can benefit your association. Joining me today are Prue Beekanavar. She is the committee manager and chair of the Welcome and Communications Committee and co-chair of the Social Committee for Berkshire Single Family HOA in Fort Worth. We also have John Hall, board member and facilities committee chair at 1400 Herman in Houston, and that is a beautiful high-rise down in Houston. We have Jerry Strong, who's the board president for Creek Hollow Estates, a single-family home community in Richardson, Texas. And we have Tim Doyle, board president for the Renaissance at Turtle Creek, a high-rise in the Dallas area. So thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate you taking the time to help talk to fellow board members about your experience in helping to really build that community. I think more now than ever, it's so important that we are reaching out even virtually to talk to our fellow residents and how to get them involved. So this is a perfect time actually to talk through this. Things don't always reach pandemic level here. So volunteer and time is always critical, and they're needed more now more than ever. Even when your community is thriving on all fronts, it doesn't hurt to have hands-on residents who are helping to pitch in and make it truly a community and get that spirit of your association going. On today's agenda, we'll cover recruitment, communication and resident feedback, board support, strategy and transparency, retaining committees, staying active and building success, and best practices and meeting cadence that your committee should meet. So first, I'm going to start with Prue, who'll go over the active engagement and how to solicit resident feedback. Prue?
Great. So one of the first questions that I wanted to, or the first topics that I wanted to address is kind of recruiting volunteers. So first of all, I live in a really great community and we have no shortage of folks ready to help. But I'll be honest, sometimes I get a little overwhelmed with the workload. And then once I start complaining, I find that everywhere I turn, someone's willing to help. And most of my neighbors are extremely aware of and grateful for the work that the committee volunteers do. But it's important to continuously and actively recruit new volunteers. So one, current volunteers don't get burned out, and two, to give everyone a chance to get active and involved in the community. So you can recruit in lots of ways. It could be an informal recruitment, a conversation with somebody at the community pool, or in a social event recap that says, hey, don't you want to help plan future fun parties and events like this? Or recruitment can be a little bit more formal, like a poll or a survey. Recently, knowing that so many new neighbors have moved into our community over the past few months, the committee chairs all released a poll on our community Facebook page defining each of the roles and asking for interest in joining various committees. And through that poll, we've recruited close to 10 new members who've been wanting to get more involved in different ways. That really helps not only to share the workload, but also share the reward.
That's fantastic.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the common pitfalls and how I've found that our community can avoid them. And I really love this topic because I can probably give you specific examples of pitfalls from each committee that I help manage. But to keep it simple, I'm going to chalk it up to two things: the importance of regular communication and record keeping. First, communication. Ensuring the community is kept updated via our Facebook group on things that are important to them, like events, safety issues, neighborhood improvement, while also coordinating with our management company to report back any concerns, has been one way to keep things running really smoothly. While residents don't know what's happening, or when residents don't know what's happening or feel like they aren't being heard, we really lose that sense of community that we've all worked so hard to gain. And on the other hand, we try not to over communicate since that can get annoying. The second best practice that I can share is record keeping. I've found that my little touch of OCD in record keeping has come in handy over the years. I'll give you two short examples. Number one, we maintain a resident directory that we use for delivering welcome baskets and to ensure that only current residents are on our neighborhood Facebook group. When we confirm that a new neighbor has moved in and we deliver a welcome basket to them, the previous resident is removed from the Facebook page, which kind of keeps things nice and clean. The other example is to keep accurate records to avoid disastrous social events. No one wants to take their kid to the neighborhood Easter egg hunt only to discover that we've run out of eggs or filled them with chocolate when it's 90 degrees out. So at each event, we've made sure to record things like date and time of the event, number of attendees, vendors used, pricing, best practices, and suggestions that we want to implement for next time. Keeping that history has been really helpful in planning each year's social events, especially as committee members rotate in and out.
That's awesome and so true. I have a little bit of OCD myself, so I appreciate a fellow OCDer. It really does help to keep the information. It's almost like a medical chart, right, for your community. So you can always go back and say what worked, what didn't. Here's the next prescription for success, right? I love that. Thank you so much, Prue. Our next subject matter expert is John Hall. He's the board member of the Houston High Rise 1400 Herman and currently chairs the Facilities Committee. In his role, he'll share more about creating a strategy for having board and manager support and transparency. Welcome, John. Can't hear you, John.
Thank you for the reminder.
That's okay.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Jessica. This is John Hall. I'm from 1400 Herman. It's a 17-story building with 16 floors of residences in the Houston area on the Herman Park. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why is it important to think strategically versus tactically as part of the Facilities Committee. Strategic thinking, the emphasis on that tends to be, so the first issue is that you can avoid the expense of rework. I'll give you an example. You carpet the floor before you paint the walls and ceiling, and the answer is, in our case, no. You try to determine the proper sequence of events so that you minimize the rework that might be required to the extent that you can control that. The second thing is strategic thinking allows the Facilities Committee and the board to kind of control project implementation schedules to minimize disruptions. A good example for single-family residences might be, when do you resurface the pool? Would you do that in the middle of the summer when everybody wants to use it, or would you prefer to do that in the fall or winter or spring time frame? So when you're thinking strategically, you're trying to look at maximum utilization of that particular aspect of your facility, and you're trying to schedule in major repairs or rework or replacement so that you minimize the disruption to whatever that amenity is. The third thing on strategic thinking is, interestingly enough, for high-rises especially, we don't see it as much for single-family residence communities, but high-rises, you have to understand, the owners share the expense of everything that's infrastructure related, whether it's the outside of the building, it's the rooftop, or if it's elevator maintenance or swimming pool maintenance, or simply generating hot water, for domestic use and or heating or cooling the building or pool. Every single thing is shared by the owners of the condominium. And unfortunately for high-rise buildings, virtually everything that you see, the sticker, the price tag, if you will, comes with about $1 million to start with. And so when you have a group of 100 owners, each time you have $1 million project, that's a $10,000 hit somehow. It's either amortized or across maybe a year period or 2-year period, or special assessment, or maybe you can get construction loans. So the Facilities Committee takes that into consideration as well. We look at the projects and we try to sequence them strategically, one, in terms of alignment with the proper infrastructure support, but two, also to help the board understand that it's not the Facilities Committee's concern to figure out how to finance a major project. But the board has that concern, and the facilities committee supports that effort by providing them insights into the potential start date, the potential duration of a project, and how long it might take to develop the funds as well as distribute the funds. We have projects that can last as short as 3 months and some that last over 2 years because you have to do some major work on the outside of a high-rise building. Should I go on, Jessica, and talk about the
Sure.
how does a good manager and property manager company support? So there's I thought an important question is how does a general manager of a property for a high-rise, or maybe a property manager for a subdivision, assist the board and/or committees? And specifically for the facilities committee at 1400 Herman, the general manager of our property, who is an FSR employee, manages a portfolio, a project portfolio for us. She creates the portfolio, she updates it with current real-time reports on risk, as well as project status. She does provide us the real-time assessment. She's kind of the frontline tactical manager of what's going on, even though she may not be the project manager. She's certainly sensitive to how it impacts the residents of our high-rise. The third thing is our facility manager offers a tremendous amount of help by just providing expert opinion and some suggestions associated with what's going on within the property and how other properties might be addressing the same topic. So she's got insights into the scope of the project, available vendors that are useful for using for a particular project, and any lessons learned that she's experienced and/or other properties that she knows about have experienced. Now, the property management firm, as an example, FirstService Residential, offers some support by encouraging networking between their property managers. So they facilitate that. There is a forum for the property managers employed by FirstService Residential where they get a chance to cross-pollinate their lessons learned and ask questions of each other. That's actually very useful. And as a facility committee chair, I lean on our general manager to reach out to find out what does FSR know about this and what insights can you provide. The other one is FSR has been able to offer subject matter experts when we've asked for them, and even sometimes they volunteer some because of the systems that we have are large-scale systems. Our hot water heaters are big enough to heat if you will, a battleship, but your hot water heaters in a single-family dwelling is a 50-gallon hot water heater. The scale it's a similar technology, but the scale is remarkably different, and the scope of replacement or repair tends to be different on that. So FSR helps by providing a strong general manager with a broad background and tools of the trade, and they encourage cross-pollination with the networking our manager is supposed to do, as well as subject matter experts that they're willing to add to the audience. The third thing I'll mention real fast is that how should committees and boards be transparent about their role in the community? Transparency, as you know, is mostly about communication. Communicate. I'd also tell you that for us, what we've tried to do is be inclusive. Our facilities committee is not just graybeards like me. We have at least one woman, and we're working on that. We're trying to expand it. You don't want a committee to be too big because then it becomes unwieldy. But you do want a good cross-section of the owner population of the building so that they feel like there's a vested interest, that we're listening to what they have as inputs, and we're acknowledging those inputs. For what it's worth, we poll most of the time on major issues in our committee. We don't always get a unanimous opinion, if you know what I'm saying. So we do collect dissenting opinions, and we make sure we vet those, and we present all of that to the board of directors. So the inclusiveness also allows for dissension, if you will, not disruption, but some dissenting opinions. And again, we have to encourage communication. So we encourage open communication. We do have a member or two of the board of directors on the committee. That helps facilitate communication with the board on major issues. And then we don't place any restrictions. People from the committee are free to talk to anybody in the building about the issues and relay their opinions. That's not always fun, but it's open, and we don't prevent that. And then, for what it's worth, every month at the monthly meeting, as a facilities committee chair, I'll provide an executive summary for what's happened in the previous month and what we think is happening in the immediate future. That's all I have to say on those 3 topics. So you can ask me questions later if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, John. That's such great information, and I completely agree about making sure you have a really good cross-section of residents that participate. I think that's really important because it creates buy-in by nature of that participation, right?
Yes, it does.
Our next speaker today is Jerry Strong. Thank you for joining us, Jerry. Again, she is the president of the HOA board in Richardson, Texas, and Jerry is going to discuss how to retain committee members and maintain an active committee and build success. Welcome, Jerry.
Hi, thank you. And just to say, even though I am the president of the board right now, I am also on committees, and I have gone back and forth between just committees, just board, both. So I can see both sides of that picture. So a lot of people ask me, why even have a committee? How does it contribute to the success of an association? And I really have 3 main ways it does that. The first way is that if you don't have the committees, the board has to do everything and the board gets burned out. They get tired. So with committees, you have more people to do the work. And so that just goes without saying. You spread the work and more gets done. Second of all, from our neighborhood, I know it's not always the case in every neighborhood, but in our neighborhood, the committees tend to be your long-term members. They're the ones who year over year do the same thing. So continuity-wise, they know what's going on. They have the record keeping that Prue mentioned. So they're the ones that say, yes, 5 years ago we tried that and this was our problems with it. Where our board members tend to cycle through, we get different people each year. So your committees are going to provide you that continuity in our neighborhood that you don't necessarily always get from board members that are cycling through. So you get new people joining the board. But third, I think, and the most important of all, is that committees are your advocates. So they are the ones that make the HOA go from an association to a neighborhood, because your committees are closer to your neighbors. I know in my community, when I first joined, it was my first HOA, and I had very negative connotations. And most of the people in the neighborhood, when you ask them when they first move in, what do you think of the association? And they say, everything's negative. Oh, I hate that. They send me violation letters. They're picking on me. They're not picking on the guy down the street that has a bad fence. They won't handle these things that an association really is not supposed to handle, like people parking on the street, or, there's a rental house in the neighborhood. The association really doesn't have any control over that, but people don't take the time to understand what an association can do or can't. So they tend to, like with government, say the government is bad, the association is bad. But when you bring the committees in, the committees do things that then give a positive connotation to the association. So the social committee throws a party and everybody goes, yeah, look what the HOA did for us. They threw us this great big party. They're great folks. They think of families. They, have things for our kids to do. Our kids can't wait till the next Easter egg hunt when there's not melted chocolate. So that sort of thing. So your social committee starts saying, oh, my HOA cares about me. They're spending money for us. Communications committee, John, when you brought that up, the fact that, communicating, telling people, your communications committee can say, your board does more than just have violation letters sent to you. They actually take care of the common areas. They're looking nice and pruned because of all the work the association is doing for you. So here, with a proper newsletter, with proper communications, you can say, here's what your association is doing for you. And so people begin to start seeing them as a value, as opposed to someone being mean to me or someone telling me what I have to do. They're doing things for me. We also have other committees, our architecture review committee, which provides consistency. But our architecture committee, I think, is very positive in the fact that they also are promoting people to improve their homes, so they approve things, they give people encouraging words, they help them with instructions on how to make the project go easier, like make sure you get a city permit, and here are things that have helped in the past. So when your committee is there helping you, then you start seeing the association as that benefit. We also have a very, very strong crime watch committee. We get close to 200 patrol hours a month out of our crime watch, so they're pretty amazing. So that promotes to the safety and well-being of the whole neighborhood. And crime watch has a very, very close relationship with the police force, so we can get tops, tips or trends that people need to watch out for, and with the communications actually get that back out to the neighborhood so that they know what to look for. And then finally, we also have a landscape committee where they can provide yard of the month, encourage people to really keep their homes looking really nice, but then also watch and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm seeing some bushes dying up here, we need to look at those, or it looks like there's a disease that's hitting some of our trees, so we should get to it before it actually takes the tree completely out. So so that's things that committees can actually do for your association. Another thing is, now you have the committees, so how do you retain really good committee members? And Prue knows this. So you join a committee because you have a passion for that area. You love your neighborhood. You want to contribute, and that's the area you love. You're social. I want to plan parties. I'm a horticulturist. I want to be in charge of landscape, that sort of thing. But you also have people who join committees just because that committee's got a lot of fun people and I want to be with them, or I'm new to the neighborhood and I want to meet someone. Those are good people to help you. They're not going to be your leaders. It's those people with the passion that you need to retain. And as long as those people are there and they're fun to deal with, you're going to get the others participating as well. So, what retains those people with the passion, and it's back to, you've got to give the committee the authority. So the committee defines their scope. They define how they work together. You don't dictate that to them. So they have a vision, they have a passion, let them go with it. Encourage them to branch out, encourage them even if they fail. What if you have that social thing that sounded like a good idea, but it just flopped? Don't chastise them for it. Just say, oh, well, try something else next time, So have the board support the different committees. So instead of just setting aside and letting the committee do their thing, as John said, be part of it. So show up at the events, support them, promote them, work with them, even be part of the committee as in a sense. And then that way you've got that close working relationship. Always work in a collaborative manner. They are their committee, you're your board, but you two work together collaboratively. You're not the principal and they're the student where you tell them what to do. So always do that. And always keep the communication lines open. And finally, and Prue will know this as well, remember they're volunteers, because sometimes life just gets in the way and that person just can't do it for the next few months. So step in and help, or just understand and say, okay, well, maybe we won't have that event this year and we'll just do something else later. Just know they're volunteers. Things that have hindered it is exactly what I was alluding to. If you dictate to a committee, if the board says, social committee, you will do these 3 events and only these 3 events, one of the sayings that cracks me up is where it says, no one is more apathetic than a person being asked to follow someone else's dream. So if it's someone else's idea, they have no passion for it, they're going to do the bare minimum and it's going to fail. So always keep that in mind. Never dictate to committees, always work with them, listen to them. Don't inactive listen, because I've seen boards that will sit in, session like a judge and have the committee talk to them. They will say, thank you, you may now leave. And then they talk about it later and then give a decision that's totally contrary to what the committee wanted. And so that ends up, in a very bad way. So, so don't do that. And another thing is to have a board take over and do something in the domain. I've seen a board that, especially with this architecture committee, they've dictated what the architecture committee could approve or disapprove outside of what was in our CC&R documents. And the committee does not take well to that. They go, we know the CC&R documents. We're trying to promote people doing home improvements, and you're just interfering with what we're trying to do. So, and then finally, back to the burnout, just stay in close contact so you know when committees are starting to burn out, when the chairs are starting to burn out, so you can step in and maybe help with co-chairs or help with rotation so that the person doesn't just totally burn out. And then finally, how do you keep committees focused? Exactly what Prue was saying. You start with the committee, you have them look at what is our purpose, what are our guidelines, what are the procedures we follow, and document, document, document. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be, like with our social committees, as much as a budget where they list the different events, how much they've spent, what they've spent them on, who the vendors were, exactly that. So we know each year we're going to have these specific events, and then those events will be planned that way. So it really is more a keeping it organized and keeping it communicating. Ask them to revisit them frequently. We had communications who, originally it was a written newsletter, and that was it. Now it's an electronic newsletter, it's a Facebook page, it's a website, it's next door. So as technology comes in, they're going to actually have to revisit how they do what they do, and then what are their procedures for doing that. So just, please encourage them to always, revisit that frequently. And another thing that we found that comes in handy is ask them to contribute to the budget. That way they're contributing their needs. They have to think in advance what they're going to need for the next year. They see the constraints of the budget. So they see, oh, if I ask for this much money for social events, my dues are going to go up. Oh, maybe we can tune this back a little bit. We don't need food trucks, for that social event. So they can then, like in a home budget, know what they can and can't do. So when they're active participations in the budget, they're not just complaining, oh, you never give me any money. And then as John said, you keep the board and the committee working. We have committee members attend the board meetings. We have sessions outlined where they can talk about their needs and what they've done. And then we also have a board liaison assigned to each committee. So that board liaison stays in touch, knows what they're doing, knows, like right now with COVID-19, my report on social committee is they're depressed because they can't do anything. So, but that sort of thing. So you get that kind of feedback. And the other thing that we also do is we encourage the committees to work with each other. That's also helps with the burnout. So communications will step in and help with extremely large social events. The same sort of thing. You get each of the committees supporting each other, so you get this cross-committee pollination, and you get committees helping each other out. So, and then finally, remind them this is fun. You're on a committee to have fun, so make sure it's always fun. So that would be my advice.
Hey, one question, Jerry. Is there a cadence for how often a committee might turn over? Like, is it 12 months? Is it 6 months?
It varies. Our art committee has probably been there 15 years.
Okay. Okay.
So social, there was a very active social committee that built up really high, was there maybe 10 years. And then we had an instance of burnout with the chair that caused issues. So then it turned over smaller committees. It was like every couple of years we were turning over, but the current social's probably about 7 years. So.
Okay.
So
there's no like
actually,
set guidelines. It's just
yes.
kind of...
And our landscape chair finally retired because she was in her mid-90s and decided driving around the neighborhood was a bit much. So, but she was doing landscape for 20 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's why I said our committees tend to be the consistent part of the neighborhood.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And now I want to reintroduce Tim Doyle, president of the Dallas High Rise, the Renaissance at Turtle Creek. And he is going to talk about best practices and meeting cadence regarding committee formation.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to start by quickly mentioning, in addition to the great things that Jerry mentioned, we found that committees provide a number of benefits. Number one, they allow owners to participate without the commitment level of volunteering to be a full director. And that also helps to foster new directors, right? It's a great place to see who may want to move into a role of a director. And sometimes even in our large community, we have 603 residences. We have a hard time finding people who want to volunteer to be a director. They also create a great sense of community, right? They're volunteering, and just as Jerry said, people see that and they see that as less of the violations and more of the fun stuff in the community. And they also allow the board to focus on, other items. So with the essential components of chartering a committee, in our community, we've had a couple instances in the past where committees have been doing great work, but they eventually went astray outside the boundaries that the board had expected of them. And the board a few years back decided that, we really need to stop and we need to do this right and think through what guidelines are we providing to the committees so that they can be successful in what they're doing. And so as we thought about it, we realized that it's important that, committees are an extension of the board and the association, and the board and the association have the governing documents which guide them. Why wouldn't committees have something to guide them as well? And so we realized that it's essential to lay out that proper foundation, invest in the proper documents, and each association's governing documents are unique. So you need to make sure that they're tailored to mesh with your existing governing documents. And we found that there's three key pieces that really allow our committees to be successful. The first is a committee appointment and termination document. So when we are launching a new committee or deciding that a committee is no longer needed, we have a formal document that does that. It sets up, here's where it starts or here's where it ends. We name the committee, we reference what the authority of that committee is, and we reference a charter that we will create for that committee. We mentioned that there will be a director assigned as a liaison to assist and guide. We set an effective date, and then because our governing documents state that the president is responsible for forming committees, the president then signs that document. And then the second piece is the committee charter. So this is the document that really is the primary guidance for that committee. It refers back to the appointment committee. It very specifically spells out the purpose of the committee. What are they there to do? What is expected of them? And maybe even what areas should they not go into? It talks about the composition of the committee, how many people, who approves volunteers, if their approval is needed. It talks about the structure, right? So should you have a chair, co-chair, secretary, somebody to take the minutes? What are those roles and how are they elected and how might they be removed by the committee if the committee deems that they need to be changed? It also has a little stopgap measure, so the president can remove a member of a committee if there is a problem on that committee, because our governing documents give the president that authority. We've never used it, but it's there if we need to. It talks about the members. Are there term limits? Ensuring that everybody realizes that it's a volunteer position, that there's no compensation coming. It talks about confidentiality. So if you have somebody working on a committee, say on the finance committee, you don't want them sharing that with the rest of the community. So there's items in there that talk about the confidentiality and also talk about their limited authority. There's a concept called apparent authority, where if a member of the community appears to others on the outside to have the authority to act on behalf of the association, then they do legally. And so it's very important for us to set that and to make sure that they only have limited authority and that they, if we don't want them to go off and spend on behalf of the association, we need to make sure that that's clearly spelled out. We talk about duties of the committee. We talk about formal proposals and the process for presenting that to the board. And then that is typically signed by the entire board. And that shows that the entire board at the time that it was created is on board with that charter for the committee. And then the committee's launched, the people are starting to volunteer, they come to a kickoff meeting. The third piece that we found is important is to have a committee member agreement. It's something that people do when they sign up for the committee. They sign a document, it just has their name, date, signature, and there's just wording to state that they are going to follow the charter and act on the best interests of the association. And then if the committee needs it, there is a space on that form for approval. Is the owner in good standing? Are they past due? Do they meet the qualifications for that specific committee? For the meeting cadence, regular meetings are important because participants or those who, we also allow not only committee members, but also any resident to come and sit in and listen to any of our committees. They don't have to be a member of the committee to sit in, but they can't vote on any motions in that committee. And so it's important both for the participants as well as the attendees to know when it is, to have a regular cadence, to have it monthly or weekly. We found that standing committees typically meet once a month, and we'll set a date, maybe the second Thursday of the month is when it always meets. Ad hoc committees that may be set up for maybe a temporary or short-term use, maybe they want to meet more frequently, maybe they'll meet weekly. And as these are volunteer positions, if the committee wants to occasionally change the date of their meeting because an important member won't be there, or if they want to even cancel a meeting because there's no important topics, they should be allowed to do that. It's important for the committee to report back their recent progress and upcoming meeting dates in the report section of the board meetings. This provides visibility of the committee to the community and accountability of the committee to the board, making sure that everyone's in sync and that they're not off doing something that the board isn't aware of. And it ensures that they're staying consistent with their charter and purpose statement. And it also helps to reiterate that the committee and the members on the committee are an important part of the process of governing the association. Agendas and minutes. So it's important that committees take minutes, and these can be fairly simple, right? We just want to document that the meeting happened, who was there, the date, and any decisions made. And it's probably not a good idea to include a novel there of what was discussed and who was against this or that. It's simply to record the decisions that are made. And then if there is a formal report, if a committee is tasked to create a formal report on a topic, it's important that they bring it back to the board, but it's best if that is in written format. We've had times where they'll point back to the minutes and say, yeah, it's in the minutes. That's probably not a best practice. And then sometimes where the committee has just presented something orally to the board, and the board wasn't really clear that that was their official recommendation. So it's good to state in the charter that the formal recommendations should be in written format. That way it's clear what it is, it can be documented and kept on file for the future. And then all of these documents, the appointment document, which can also record terminations of committees, the charters, the minutes, the membership meetings, all of those should be kept by the association, and we keep ours in our minute book just for long-term use. And that's what I have.
That's fantastic information, actually. Very insightful and very organized, which I totally appreciate. OCD here again. That there's a documented process, a format that's approved. Like, I think that's so important because it really keeps things very clear and, like you said, very transparent, so that anyone could go and look it up and find the information. So I think that's really critical.
Yeah, one of the other things that we've done is we found that the committees are liking, they'll create like a Dropbox or a Box account, and they'll put all of their documents, all of their minutes in there, and they provide the secretary access. And so the secretary just periodically goes in, copies the minutes out of their folder and puts them into the official minute book. And that seems to be a good process for us and allows the committees to kind of self-organize their own area while at the same time allowing the board visibility.
That's great. That's a great recommendation, actually. Yeah. Okay, so we did gather a few questions that we had heard about committee formation from some other board members, as well as some of our own community managers or general managers. So we wanted to ask these questions of you guys. The first question is for Prue. What is the single best piece of advice you have for other board committees? Like what can you provide as best practice?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short and simple. I simply encourage committee members to remember that even though you're a volunteer, you work for the community, and you should always keep your neighbor's best interest in mind. It's easy to let feelings, opinions, past experiences, histories impact your behavior, but staying objective is really key to supporting the community fairly and effectively.
That's really great advice. And those, John, to that point, as the chair of the facilities committee, why is it important to visit equivalent properties? Like, what do you get out of really that practice?
You know, the word I like to use is benchmarking, and I don't know if everybody understands that, but if you go see somebody else's best practices to understand, or maybe worst practices, you get both sides of the story by visiting a different facility, having a dialogue with the people that were involved in implementation of a certain project, and then gleaning from that the best practices, as we're doing here in this forum today. It's an opportunity to learn more, see good examples, and try to identify places where there might be pitfalls in major projects.
That's a really good point. Very good recommendation. Our next question is for Jerry. Jerry, how do you maintain a successful committee board relationship for the good of the association? Why is that important? How do you do it?
I was going to say over and over, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Make sure that you are working in a respectful manner with each other. You know, don't dictate, just make sure that you're constantly in communication, that you, if there are differences, you try to work through the differences. You don't just make a judgment call, you know, you make them understand why maybe a board can't do what a committee wants, so that they understand and that they know you're considering what they're asking, and then you're giving them the other side of the picture. So it is really work things in a collaborative manner. When you just dictate, then one of two things are going to happen. You're going to have your committee members at odds with your board, and they're either, number one, going to leave, and when they leave, they talk to their neighbors, and they're the people the neighbors have fun with. So the board is never going to win that one. And second of all, what could happen, and which happens frequently in our neighborhood, the committee takes over the board so they can overturn whatever that edict was. And that's not good either, because then you've got the people in the board from the perspective of the committee only, not looking at the community as a whole. And a board should really be looking at the community as a whole, exactly like what Prue said. So even when you're volunteering, you have to look at all aspects of it. So you don't want just a committee-led board focusing in one area. So that's why you need to keep that working relationship going.
That's a really good recommendation. Thank you for that. So Tim, do you have anything that we overlooked that you can add?
I think we've covered the topic pretty well, but I would like to relay just one example of how committees have really benefited our association. So we recently decided to completely overhaul our rules and regulations. And so to do that, and I'm sure that as board members, we've all had people say, you know, what gives you the right to set up that rule, or why is this rule in place? And so this time we really wanted to do it right. And we decided that committees was a great way to do this. So what we did is we set up a committee. They reviewed the existing rules. They reached out and got the rules of 3 to 5 neighboring properties. They collected feedback from residents, and they also learned from the management team what was working well or what wasn't working well that needed to be maybe clarified. And then they presented a formal recommendation to the board. So now when owners say, you know, why is this rule here, we can simply say, we as the board didn't create this rule. A committee of your neighbors created it. It was reviewed by the association's attorney. It was distributed to all owners. The board listened to their feedback, made changes, and then it was enacted by the board. So this is the rules of the community by the community, not coming just from the board. And finally, I'd just like to reiterate that committees, provided they have the proper foundation and the upfront considerations, can be of a great assistance to the board and to the community, but it's important to invest in their upfront setup and to get it right, and just use your existing governing documents as that starting point.
Tim, I love that you mentioned kind of soliciting feedback. Sorry to interrupt.
No, good.
Because I think that's so important. We've talked a lot about communication and how to constantly keep everybody engaged, but I think that soliciting that feedback to check in periodically is extremely important, especially for communities like mine, who is, you know, we're going to, by the end of this year, have increased by 100%. So we will have doubled in size, and those needs change. You know, Jerry, you were talking about some of your committees that have been in their roles for decades. You know, we have not had a single committee last for more than a year, because we are constantly changing and evolving and getting new people and changing opinions. So speaking of collecting feedback and soliciting that feedback, I think it's all about how and where you ask. You know, I mentioned earlier that we really leverage our community Facebook page to gather feedback. Neighbors really know that that page is a safe place. It's not monitored by the management company, by FirstService Residential. It's not monitored by the developers. That's a safe space. They can ask candid questions or share pointed feedback through the page. And from there, I kind of collect the feedback as the interim communications committee person. I summarize the feedback, I send it to FirstService for awareness, and so that they can address any concerns that are related to the management company. And then when collecting feedback on specific topics, we'll often post a poll on our Facebook page. Typically that's for smaller or less sensitive topics, or we'll create a separate survey via like SurveyMonkey or one of those platforms if we need a little bit more detail or want to keep the feedback confidential. And then we try to ask questions objectively and not try to nudge the participant in one direction or another. And we've been really successful in gathering that feedback because we also publish the results. Like Tim was talking about, it's important to also share and act on things that the community says needs to change. That really helps keep that objectivity. So you're saying, hey, you guys voted on this, you know, 67% of the community wants to do it this way. We're just kind of following the rules that you guys have dictated based on that feedback.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that our communications committee does is every year we have an annual survey that we send out to all residents, and we have a tremendous feedback from that. Not only are we collecting the long-term change in you know, the sentiment of our owners, but we're getting detailed information. And each year it's on a slightly different topic. One year it might be, you know, communications approaches, what different communications avenues are most appreciated by the owners. One year it might be the just the look of and upkeep of the property. And we collect all of that feedback, and then the board gets to review that, and we also share that out at our annual meeting back to the owners.
That's fantastic. I mean, such good insight and guidance that I think a lot of our viewers today can take away and go back to their respective boards and really think about how to build that formula for success of the committees, right? I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you for joining today. Do we have any other input from anybody else before you sign off?
Nope.
All right. Smiles all around. That's good. We hope you walk away with the refreshing, great ideas that we've been shared today on how to form committees in your own respective communities and how to really engage your residents and getting them involved. So we really appreciate all the panelists' time and taking the time to give your expert advice to all of your fellow board members across the region. And thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.